that you're here. And I'm so thankful that I get to spend a little bit of your week with you today. It's not always how we start in life, is it? It's how we finish. You know, when I was a kid and graduated high school, we all make those speeches at high school graduations, right? Valedictorians, salutatorians. We all talk about the great things we're going to do and how we're going to change the world and, how it's all going to work out. And then we get old and we realize that we didn't do any of those things. Didn't really work out like we thought it was going to work out, right? There's an old Statler Brothers song, if you're an old person. There's an old Statler Brothers song. It's called called The Class of 57. I don't know if you ever listened to that song, and I'm not the class of 57. I'm not quite that old, but it's a song kind of about that, about how we start one way and we think we're going to do things and we think, our dreams are going to come true and life's going to work out like we want it to, but, it doesn't always work out. A lot of the people I graduated with, some of them have passed away at this point, and a lot of them had problems with their lives and bad things happened, and some worked out pretty good, but it's kind of one of those things, isn't it? We start something, we don't always know how we're going to finish. I was at a store the other day, and the lady was trying to help me down at Casey's in Eufaula, and she said, "I apologize, it's my first day." And I said, there's one thing about a first day, there'll always be a last day. And that's something we don't think much about sometimes, do we? There's always going to be a last day for anything in our lives that we do or anything we try to accomplish. There's always going to be a first, there's always going to be a last, isn't there? And we want things to work out the way we want them to. We want to finish strong. And sometimes it's a real job in our lives to do that. But more importantly, it's a real job sometimes in our faith to do those things. Jesus had disciples that followed him. His fame was growing. His popularity was spreading. He was in a position where people were longing to be with him. They wanted to be with him. They wanted to be part of him, because when great things happen, people just are drawn to that. And Jesus was that guy, People were being healed, and he was changing the world, and he was talking to people in a way they'd never heard of before, and he was revealing God to them in a magnificent way. And they wanted to be part of that. They wanted to be involved in that. All these people are following him. And one night, Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray to God, and he prays to choose these men, these 12 men that are going to be his guys. And I imagine at that particular point in the ministry of Jesus, all those men, all those people in that crowd wanted to be one of those 12. Didn't they? I mean, they wanted it. I would have. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you want to be one of those guys that was closest to the guy that everybody wanted to be close to? Wouldn't you want to be one of his inner circle, one of those men that was going to get to be with him, and that people are going to come to you to get to Jesus? Wouldn't that be something? For you to be that guy, like Andrew, when they come, they wanted to get to Jesus, and Andrew was the guy. He could take them to Jesus because he was Jesus' guy. I'd want to be Jesus' guy. And they thought, man, this guy's the Savior. This guy's going to change things. This guy's going to be the King of Israel. Man, we need to get on this, right? Isn't that why when James and John, she said, one to sit on your right and one to sit on your left when you come into the kingdom, because they thought, man, he's coming into the kingdom. And we want to be part of that. Boy, if one of us can sit on his left and one can sit on his right, and Jesus is going to be on the throne, and it's going to be great, and it's going to be magnificent. And Jesus looked at her. He says, you don't know what you're asking. You don't understand my kingdom. But man, on this day, this was the first day, wasn't it? And Jesus chose those guys, and he prayed over them, and he said, you're going to be my guys. And man, they were excited. It's like the first day on the job, right? I mean, they were excited. They were ready to punch that time clock and get to work. Because, man, we're riding the gravy train here, right? This is going to be great. Everybody loves this Jesus, and everybody's going to love us. And, man, we're going to roll. It's going to be wonderful. And I've got selected. I'm one of the guys. But they didn't see the last day, did they? They just saw the first day. And Jesus called them 12, and he gave them authority. He said, I'm going to give you authority over unclean spirits. You can cast them out and to heal every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Yeah, I'm one of the guys. And the names of the 12. You ever been at school and you took a test and they put the results out on the wall? They don't do that anymore because they don't like to make kids feel bad. But when I was a kid, they put your name right up there, and you was either first or last, right? You know, and if you was last, everybody laughed at you. And that's how we did it when I was a kid. There was no consolation trophies when I was a kid. They just laughed at you when you lost. And you know, they put those names up. And this is that deal. And these are the guys. Simon, who's called Peter, and Andrew, and James, and John, and Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. You know, that one who betrayed him, they didn't know that day. Judas didn't even know that day, did he? They didn't have a clue. He was one of the guys. He's one of the 12. You know, but the thing about relationships is, whatever relationship you're in your life, whether it's your job relationship or your marriage relationship or your work relationship or your kid relationship or whatever it is, every relationship in your life has stages. Now, I'm not going to talk about this morning. We should have a sermon on this. This would be good. But in marriage, they say there's 5 stages of marriage, right? 5 stages of marriage. There's the infatuation stage or the romance stage where that person can do no wrong. They walk on water. They're absolutely God's gift to humanity, right? And everything's perfect and it's glorious for a little bit, right? But then after that, we kind of have this power struggle stage, don't we? Where we realize that they're really not as perfect as we thought they were, and maybe we're going to try to change them and make them perfect. That's a hard stage of marriage right there, let me tell you right now. My wife did that for a few years. She finally decided she couldn't change me. She just didn't have to live with me, right? And so you got that power struggle stage of life, right? And then they say you got a stability stage. That's where you kind of accept each other. You know, you're like, well, he ain't perfect, but, you know, I guess he'll do till we can find somebody else, you know. You kind of get in that stability stage of life. And then you get into this commitment, which is a good stage. It's that stage of life where you say, I not only accept you, but I really commit to you. You know, your flaws are all right with me, and my flaws are all right with you, and we're in a good place, and that's a good place to be. You know, and then we get to this bliss stage. Some people never get to that. But it's the best stage of marriage. It's that stage where you can sit around and hold hands and talk to one another and dream things and talk about things, and it's just wonderful. That's the best stage of marriage whenever you get to that point where you just look at each other and love each other. That's the best stage of life. But you know, we all go through it, and if we don't, we fail. We just, in the middle of that somewhere, we just fall off and fall apart. I was having breakfast the other morning with Roy, and Roy gave me some Roy wisdom, you know, which is good. And I love Roy. I love Roy a lot. But we're having breakfast, and Roy's going to he's asking to give me some Roy wisdom. And he said something I've often thought about, but it was kind of an interesting statement. He says, when did you decide to love your wife? And that's kind of a really deep question, isn't it? You know, when did you decide to love your wife? Because at some point in life, love becomes a decision, right? We decide we're going to do it. We decide we're committed. We decide that that's who we are and what we're about. And all that infatuation, all that thing goes away, and we just constantly make a decision to love. And in anything in life, I think that's true. And with God, I think that's true. And there's a beginning for us, right? With Christ. There's this beginning, this point, this minute, this instant in time, place in history where all of a sudden we decide that we're going to be a child of God. We're going to be obedient to the faith. We're going to put the Lord on in baptism. And what a glorious day, isn't it? And we come up out of that water and we're fresh and we're new and we're excited and we're in that infatuation stage, aren't we? We see everything is good and the church is wonderful and people are wonderful and everybody's greeting you and patting you on the back and telling you how glad they are that you're their brother or sister and praying over you and it's just wonderful. Right? I mean, it's just wonderful. It's a great day, and it's an exciting day, and it's a wonderful day. But with every beginning, there's an end. Right? With every beginning, there's an end. And when we have to consider that in our walk with Christ, because it's how we finish, it's how we end. That's really important, isn't it? And we have to consider that walk we have with Jesus and the commitment that we make and what we decide to do, because the truth is that, you know, there's a honeymoon stage, right? With God. There's a honeymoon stage when you become a Christian. And that's great, and it's wonderful when you're there. But, you know, when I walk into this side of the baptistry and get baptized and walk out. What meets me when I walk out is the same world that was there when I walked in. The world didn't change because I changed. This doesn't work like that. I might have changed, but my world didn't change. The friends I had when I went into that water are the same friends I have when I walk out of that water. The same marriage I had, the same children I had, the same job I had, the same things in my life that might have driven me to the point that I thought I needed to become a Christian or still exist within my life. And those things are going to pull you back. And right offhand, it's easy. It's easier when you start, and you think, because you're right on fire for it, and you think, well, I'm not going to associate with them friends anymore. I'm not going to do those things that cause me to have trouble for, and I'm not going to go to those places anymore, do those things, and I'm going to change my life, and I'm going to be better. I made this commitment to God, and man, I'm going to be a Christian, and I'm going to live that Christian life, and it's going to work. But life doesn't work like that sometimes. It just doesn't. For all the good intentions we have, sometimes we just don't pull it off. The world draws us back in. Things draw us away, and the power of our former life is more powerful than the power of the life we could have, and it sucks us back to where we were instead of where we want to be. But the honeymoon stage is great. And that's where these guys were when Jesus called them to be apostles. They were in this honeymoon stage. These crowds were following Jesus, and people wanted to be next to him. People wanted to be near him, and they were right in the middle of it, and it was great. It had to be great. I just can't imagine any other way to describe it. For a year and a half or 2 years, these guys were at the best place they could be. I mean, it was amazing. Isn't it funny how they went from wanting to be noticed? You ever thought Peter was there? Peter was God's right-hand man, wasn't he? Peter was right there with the Lord. And I bet Peter loved that. I bet when he walked into some place and people were getting healed and they were looking at Peter and talking to Peter, and Peter felt important, and Peter wanted them to know, I'm with this guy. I'm with him. Until Peter got to the point that he said, I don't know him. What happened? You see, the honeymoon never lasts forever, does it? The honeymoon never lasts forever, because eventually they started to see what this was really about, and they started to see what it was going to cost them, and they started to question and to think, what have I really got myself into? And Peter even comes to Jesus and he says, what are we going to get? All of us who have left mothers and fathers and houses and land, what are we going to get? What's in it for us? What are we going to wind up with? They started to question this whole journey they were having with Jesus. They started to understand that maybe this wasn't going to go exactly the way they thought it was going to go. They started to come to a realization that this journey wasn't going to be as easy as they thought, and that things were going to happen. And in Matthew 10, Jesus really puts it down, and he tells them, and he says, he who loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who has found this life will lose it, and he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. How hard that had to be for those 12 guys around him to hear these words and to understand that this wasn't going to end how they thought it was going to end when they started the journey. It wasn't going to be as good as they thought. It wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. It wasn't going to be as wonderful as they thought. There was going to be challenges, and there was going to be things that they had to face and things they had to overcome. You and I, when we become Christians, we sometimes, when we first were Christians, we don't understand that. But as we become more and more in the faith and more who Christ wants us to be, we understand that there's obstacles in our life that we have to overcome. There's things that we have to deal with. And things are not always going to be easy for us. And being a Christian is not always going to be easy to do. And there's going to be a price to pay for being Christian. There's going to be a price to pay for being Christ-like. There's going to be a sacrifice to be made. And that reality sometimes is more, that's where we end it. When we come to that realization that it's not all about me. It's about God. It's about Christ. It's about His kingdom. Sometimes that's where we start to fall away from that. We begin to question what we've got ourselves into. It becomes hard. People become hard. We realize that not everybody in the church can maybe be as friendly as we want them to be, and maybe we have difficulties or relationship issues with other people in a congregation. May we realize that it's not always easy to come and sit. Maybe things happen, and sometimes it's more than we can take, and we quit, and people quit. And that's the saddest day of my life when that happens. But the truth is, if we can get past it, we get to this place of commitment to God. You know, commitment is something that Brent and I talk about a lot. Committed. How committed are we to Christ? How committed are we to His kingdom? You know, in John 6, Jesus came down to that point, didn't He? He offended them. He offended all those Jews that were there, all those people that have been following Him. And, you know, if you really read John 6 starts out with this magnificent Jesus walks on the water. It's not to the end of John 6, things take a terrible turn, don't they? Jesus said, unless you drink my blood and eat my flesh, you have no part in me. And they couldn't understand that. And many withdrew from Him. We're not following Him anymore. John 6:66. I always thought that really couldn't be a coincidence that 666 is probably one of the saddest verses of the Bible. But it says, as a result of this, many of His disciples withdrew, and we're not walking with Him anymore. So Jesus said to the 12, is this too much? Can you not do this anymore? Have you decided that it's time that you leave me? Are you going to quit? You know, it's one of those verses in the Bible, when I read it, I think Jesus was crying. I don't know. Jesus looked up. Everybody was gone. I don't know that He even looked up. And Jesus said, you do not want to go away also, do you? And Simon Peter said, Lord, I'm committed. You know, there's a point in our Christianity and our faith and our walk with God that you have to decide if the internal is more important than the external. There's a point where you have to decide that I'm going to commit to the Lord regardless of what's going on around me. Regardless of what's going on in my life, regardless of what other people think or other people feel or however people think about me or whatever's going on, regardless of all those things, I'm going to be a Christian. I'm going to worship. I'm going to follow. I'm going to serve. Because in the end, the only person that's going to stand before God and answer for Rex is Rex. It's that easy. There's no other way to say it. One person's going to stand before God and answer for me, and that's me. And I don't know what you think about God or what you think about Jesus, but somehow I don't think an excuse is going to cut it with God. Do you? I don't think my dog ate the homework's going to get there, right? I think God's going to say, why did you live the way you lived? At what point in your life was something more important to you, Rex, than me that made you quit? Explain that to me, Rex, if you will. What in your life was important enough to you that you quit? What's more important than me? Jesus would say. I don't think I have an answer to that. Do you? I don't. Who shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Peter was committed, wasn't he? Oh, he's going to falter, as we all do. Peter was committed. Peter decided to love the Lord right there. Didn't he? Peter decided to love the Lord. He decided that Jesus Christ was more important than all those people that had left, was more important than his family, was more important than anything. Peter said, Lord, I'm committed. You know, I think as a Christian, that's the greatest thing we can ever do, is decide to love the Lord. Decide we're committed. Decide that there's nothing external in this life that's more important than my internal, that there's nothing that's going to keep me from the love of God, that no person can ever do that. And when you make that decision in your heart, when you make that decision in your life, you've made the right decision. God smiles upon that. You and I, we decide with our lives who to serve. We decide how to live. It's within us. In Acts chapter 1, it says, when they entered the city, they went to the upper room. I have never really looked much at this verse. I got to tell you, I've just read over it. I mean, there's a lot of things in Acts 1 I've looked at, right? Choosing of Matthias, all that stuff. But I just passed this over. But this time, when I thought about this, I just thought about the awesomeness of this right here. You know, I just told you at the beginning of this, I said, with every first, there's a last, right? Do you know this may be the last time in history that these 11 men now, because of Judas, that these 11 men will all be together with one another in the same room? They're all going to go all over the world. All over the world. And they're going to die. Most of them. Terrible deaths. But at this minute in history, they're all back together in this room for the last time. And they say their names. That's not a mistake. Luke didn't do that on accident. Luke did that to make a point. That this was the end. Just as Jesus chose them 12 to start, now Jesus has chose those 12 to go into the world and to spread the gospel and to die horrible deaths. They didn't know on that first day. They didn't know this day. Did they? But they become committed enough along the way that they were ready for this day. And Andrew's going to be put to death by the sword by Herod. And Peter's going to be crucified upside down by Nero. And Andrew's going to be crucified on an X-shaped cross. And Bartholomew's going to be flayed alive and skinned alive. Did they know that the day that Jesus says, "You're my guys"? But they knew it was worth it. They knew the internal was more important than the external. They knew the end was more important than the beginning. They knew the finish was more important than the start. You and I have to look to that finish. We have to look towards a strong finish. You know, in Isaiah 40, this verse is all over the place, right? T-shirts and walls, and you used to see it a lot. I don't see as much anymore. It's Hebrew poetry in Isaiah. And they tell me, I'm not Hebrew, but they tell me in Hebrew poetry that the strongest is always at the end. You know, when we walk with God our entire lives, there's days we soar. There might not be a lot, but I've had a few. Days I baptized people I'd thought about and prayed about for a long time. Days that I have those days. I have soaring days. You know? And you know, the truth is that, you know, I have a few running days. I do. Days that are pretty good. Seems like I get a lot done. Seems like things are moving forward. But you know, the strongest part of that's the end. To walk and not get weary. You know, it doesn't matter, brethren. That last person that goes across the line at the Boston Marathon, he still finished the race. Didn't he? Didn't he? I mean, he finished it just as sure as that first guy that crossed that line. He finished it, didn't he? And he was tired and he was sore, and everybody had gone home. And the ribbon was gone, and the TV was gone, and there was nobody to take a picture. But that guy crossed that finish line. He finished. You know, this life isn't always going to be pretty. It isn't always going to be easy. People aren't always going to love you. People are going to betray you. People are going to hurt you. Life is going to hurt you. I wish it wasn't that way, but it is. And a lot of people along the way, they quit. People quit all kinds of things. I've quit a lot of things in my life, haven't you? People quit all kinds of things. People quit jobs. People quit hobbies. People quit going places. People quit all the time. And sometimes people quit things that are important. People quit their children. People quit their marriages. People quit their God. You know, there's one thing in life I don't ever want you to quit, and that's your God. I want you to finish. I don't care if you drag yourself across bloodied and beat up and battle scored. I want you to cross the line. I want you to be committed, because I want to be with you forever. You know, that's what this is about. Life isn't about how we start. Really, it isn't. It never is. With anything in your life. We rejoice in the start, don't we? In the day we're married, and it's so exciting, and we put that ring on each other's fingers, and we say that we're going to love each other till death do us part. Until you get old, and you realize that one day one of you is going to go on without the other one, because death really is going to part us. You know, life has some tough finishes. But I promise you with God, I promise you with God, that if you finish, regardless of how hard it is, if you finish, God's going to give you a home forever. All we got to do, brethren, is finish. And we got to pull each other across the line to do it, then that's what we got to do. But we need to get there. I love you. I thank you. I'm blessed to be able to stand in front of you. If there's anything we can do for you, would you let it be known while we stand?